Marketing for the now, marketing for the now, marketing for the now, marketing for the now. 10 minutes, 12 remarkable guests for 2 hours answering a singular important question.
Are you ready, Gary?
What do you think?
Hey, Gary. I can't believe it. Marketing for the now, number 16. It's our sweet 16.
It's a grown-up now.
It's a grown-up now. It's also the last episode of 2020. I didn't think we would actually reach the end of 2020 for some reason. But we've got one more question to ask 12 people. One more question. Which consumer behavior shifts will be key to driving growth in 2021? Are you ready?
Always.
All right. First up, we're kicking off the show with Shark, Barbara Corcoran. Her credits include straight D's in high school and college. She had 20 jobs by the time she turned 23, and then she borrowed $1,000, quit her job as a waitress, and started a tiny real estate company in New York City that is now a $5 billion real estate business. Welcome, Barbara.
Hey, my pleasure to be here. I love Gary. I'll do anything for him.
Barbara, it's great to see you. It's always great to see you. Happy holidays and pending New Year. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to get right into it because I know a lot of people were excited that you're going to be on the show. So thanks for kicking us off. In your opinion, which consumer behavior shift will be key to driving growth in 2021?
Am I allowed to pick more than one? Because I think there's probably 4 or 5 out there. Okay.
Yes, you are.
One, the customer is in charge. I think if we didn't understand that before, we certainly understand it now. The behavior that we collaborate with the customer is over with. They're in charge. End of story. So I think the key here as an entrepreneur is you have to stay very close to your customer, listen hard and see what they need. And I think the first thing they need is they want safety. And that ain't going to go away either. And when I say safety, I think you have to put safety first. Customers demand it, and you don't have to worry about how to pay for it because you can't afford to worry about how to pay for it. You just have to do it. I think social media is the fastest and cheapest way to communicate what the safety measures your particular business has done. And I think the social distancing protocols that we've all recently encountered are here to stay as well. Things like the dots on the floor, I don't expect them to go away next year at this time. Mounted thermometers at restaurant doors, discretionary masks for travel. I think it's all, we're going to just see a softer version of the same old and it ain't going to go away. But safety is what people care about now, and they will continue.
How long do you, let me jump in on that one.
Yeah.
You know, okay, so we see a softening, let's say a year from today. Do you see a time where we go back to 2019 levels, or do you think this is now stuck in our culture for quite a long time?
It's part of our culture. It's not going to go away. Would you travel in an airplane, whether you're traveling business class or coach, and not wear a mask? I wouldn't. Never again. I mean, I kind of wanted to do that when people were coughing next to me, but I thought it was socially rude. Nope, I'm going on the airplane with the mask forevermore. I don't want to catch what's going around. No, nothing's going to go away totally. We'll have a residual that will become part of our culture. Definitely.
Understood. Keep going.
Okay. Online shopping is king. I mean, I almost feel embarrassed to say that everybody knows that. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think part and parcel of that is you need to go to where the customer is. I have one business named Cousins Bay Lobster, a large franchise of lobster trucks.
Yes, I like those guys.
Yeah, those guys. I think you interviewed Sam. Yeah, smart entrepreneur.
Smart.
But the moment COVID hit, that guy had pivot. I hate the word pivot, but I'll have to use it because I don't know what's the substitute. He turned his business around. There's a new substitute I can use. With contactless pickup, communicating where his trucks are going to be. And he moved his trucks out of the normal places that were crowded. And he utilized every single large shopping mall parking lot, gave people numbers. They waited in line, picked up. They went home with their dinner out. And his increase in sales went through the roof within a month and a half. Pretty sharp, but he understood he needed to go to where the customer was comfortable being. I also have a business that's my most successful business named Kofi. And what it is a wearable sweatshirt. And what they did is they had $150 million in sales in big box stores that were sent back to them when COVID hit, because the big box stores they were merchandising to had closed. What were they going to do? They increased their sales online, turned up a website that they hadn't taken seriously as before, and they turned $150 million in sales into $250 million in sales. They went to where the customer wanted to be. That's exactly what they did. And then also, again, obvious, so I hesitate to say it, social media is the name of the game. I mean, I don't invest in a single business in this season on Shark Tank unless I felt that the entrepreneur was almost a borderline genius on social media, because I know we're going to have to rely on the social media platforms forevermore because we have spoiled our customers with us and they want it. In social media, I think key traits or key entrepreneurs, or pardon me, key employees that all of us need as entrepreneurs are now the producers, the storytellers, the videographers. It's really become the new norm. There used to be extra people. It was nice, a luxury feature if you want, but with social media being the name of the game, it's not the case anymore. And
Barbara, real quick on that, I'm sorry to interrupt. When you were building your real estate empire, so much of it to do with branding, was direct mail a very strong pillar for you in the prime of your growth?
Yes, it was, but everyone used direct mail. But the way I was able to become extremely successful with it is I used postcards, because I watched people at home, including myself, and I didn't open junk mail. Right. Postcard I was forced to read. That's what we used. Yes. So
you paid higher to be your individual postcard versus maybe in a value pack, and you feel like even though you were paying more to get into a mailbox, you were getting seen more often, and that gave you a leg up.
It gave me a leg up, but honestly, I never considered value packs because I'm too selfish. I want my own stage wherever I am, and I got it on a postcard. What was more effective than the postcard campaigns I constantly ran was buying billboards 10 cents on the dollar. A lot of people
remnant inventory, right?
Inventory.
Yeah, I did the same thing for Wine Library
over New York, and that put my brand front line and center. Billboards were the king. And then also what a lot of people didn't know then that I took full advantage of is I bought remnant space in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, previously saved for retailers. But when I checked into their rules, retail was not the rule. It was just ShopRite and everybody was using it. And I started putting full page advertising for all my properties that looked at $1 billion when I really had 10 cents on the dollar on that as well.
It's funny. I really think your career, and knowing it, being an East Coast guy, you know, a lot of people think about me with social media, but I got my chops in direct mail, print, outdoor, radio, because I was advertising as like a kid for my dad's store. And I think the reason social was so natural to me was all the things I learned between distribution, underprice. You just basically talked about underpriced attention. You would buy more strategically around places that people would look. You took advantage of the remnant cost, or I did the same exact stuff on print and outdoor and direct. You couldn't really do it the same way on direct mail. But the other thing I learned during that era, because I was doing so much of it, was the creative was the variable. Even though I was buying the full page New York Times ad in the dining section at a really good price because I knew when to buy it and how, my ad mattered to how many people I would get. And I think that is a lot of people watching right now are like, but social's not working for me. And I'm like, the creative is the variable.
And the creative also must have the key ingredient. I'm sure you'd agree with me. It has to be authentic. People see through the bullshit anymore. You know, if your story's not authentic, if you don't connect with them on some basis, I've even gotten rid of makeup in most of my postings. I find that people respond better to me looking ugly than all dolled up. Authentic is key, and I don't think that's going to change either, of course.
I agree with you. You got one parting shot? We got a minute. I know these are going quick.
Okay, so one more thing.
Please.
You need to be an entrepreneur that thrives on change. I mean, if you don't welcome change and look for it, seek it out like a missile, like what's next, like a kid with a curiosity box, right? You're not going to be ready for the changes out there. I mean, change for me, and I don't think I'm imagining, is happening probably twice the rate it would 4 years ago. And if you're not aware that today is the single best opportunity you're ever going to see again for the next 10 years of taking over your competitor's marketplace, his beat, because you can outperform, outcreate, outdo whatever you have to do to get rid of that guy. This is the time to do it. The best time to move ahead is always in the worst times. Any smart entrepreneur will tell you they moved ahead in the worst times because the big guys are asleep at the wheel.
They get tight. They get tight. Most people go on defense. It's exactly the time to go. Yeah. Barbara, it's great to see you.
Okay, my pleasure.
Thank you so much for this 10 minutes, really.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we've got Stephanie Buscemi, CMO of Salesforce. Stephanie leads a global team of 1,400 marketers, and she's on the A-list of every CMO award and co-author of Driven to Perform. Prior to Salesforce, she held senior roles at IHS, SAP, Oracle, and more. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Stephanie, it's a real pleasure.
Good to see you.
Let's get right into the question.
Let's do it.
Which consumer behavior shift or shifts will be key to driving growth in 2021 from your perspective? And maybe 1 minute of context, because we have such a mixed audience on Salesforce, and SaaS and the business.
Yeah, so just to backdrop on Salesforce real quick. What does Salesforce do? We connect customers and companies together. 21 years in the business, #1 in customer relationship management. Think about 21 years ago, the mission of the company was to help salespeople better engage with their customers. The mission hasn't changed. We're just now doing that across all the touch points. So whether it's a service interaction, a commerce interaction, a marketing interaction, and we're orchestrating those. So that's the quick bit on Salesforce. I would say the biggest thing that I see now, I've seen it with millennials, but I see it now even more with the pandemic, is that it is truly no longer enough to have just a good product or service. To reach a full potential, there has to be an emotional connection, building trust with the brand and the values of the company. Customer relationships are the biggest differentiator. And it isn't, again, just built on your product and services. This generation wants to know what you're all about. And companies have long talked about purpose. We've all talked about purpose. But I believe this next generation is holding our feet to the fire to show it. Walk the walk, don't talk the talk. In fact, there are real consequences for marketers who value wash and they can't back it up with programs in terms of what they're doing. We talk a lot about business as the greatest platform for change. We're not waiting for anyone else. We believe business can give back and contribute to the environment socially, economically. And I believe that is going to be a prerequisite for any company's growth and success moving forward.
I couldn't agree more. Talk to me about speed. Sitting at such a senior level, you have such a large company, continue to get larger. I was an investor in Slack, so I texted Mark a thank you for that transaction.
All right.
How much concern do you have around how fast the organization is at creative and media deployment? How much is speed being talked about? How much is context? How much is relevance over awareness? Are those conversations relevant right now in Salesforce?
I would say the #1 conversation is the conversations are speed and relevance. In fact, we have we write as a company our values, our vision for the year. Every year it's an exercise we do, and it's really a living, breathing document. It's not sort of a one-time exercise. And we had written ours for the calendar year, and then we went into the pandemic. And when we came back together very quickly, we said, what do we value most right now? And it's relevance, being relevant to our customers, and what they need now is probably very different from what they need 6 months ago. So we shifted very quickly. A great example of that is if you had told me at the beginning of last year that Salesforce would build and make generally available to our customers contact tracing application, employee response management application, and now a vaccine management application. I don't think our engineers had that in the cards, in the plan, but that's what our customers wanted and needed from us, and we could do it. And so we moved the organization. People went home virtually on a Friday and came to work on a Monday to build these applications, and we've delivered them. That's relevance to what our customers needed now.
What
and
about
we work at speed.
From a marketing standpoint, what do you think the big, sitting at the seat that you have, what do you think the biggest miss of the collective B2B environment is? I think you saw a lot of B2C clients have a lot of TV production dollars go away this year because they didn't use them because they couldn't. And it's been interesting to see what they were doing. I've had a lot of conversations at the VaynerX level with B2B marketers who spend I mean, I always knew B2B companies in the Fortune 5,000 spent way too much money on conferences and booths and things of that nature. I don't think I really understood how far along and how egregious those budgets were. You know, A, do you see that perspective as well? And B, how much, you know, when I ask that question, what is the opportunity for a better job for the B2B, and especially the B2B SaaS industry, because we have a lot of people here, marketers, but even small startups. What's the miss or the opportunity, however you want to frame it?
The miss is if people aren't completely getting a match to the B2B marketing playbook. The miss is that we see a lot of people, yes, B2B heavy on live events. Salesforce was no exception. Normally I'd be doing Dreamforce in San Francisco right now. The reality, though, is many are retrofitting those conferences into digital, and it looks like it.
Yeah.
It's really stale. It's really dry. And you have to completely, it's not a retrofit. You have to re-engineer your organization. It means what you build, your talent, the composition. B2B marketing is having a huge shift in talent that it needs right now, needing to be much more digitally savvy, overweighting on live events talent. So there's a talent shift that needs to happen. There's a reinvention that needs to happen there. I'll give you my own example. When we thought about reimagining Dreamforce for virtual, we looked at all of the ingredients that go into Dreamforce: inspiration, fun, learning. You know, it's a tech conference meets a Super Bowl, meets a rock concert, meets a baby Davos. How would we replicate all of that in a digital forum? And the reality was we had to decompose it and then create one to few and one to many experiences. There wasn't one online event.
And Steph, do you think even also the realization of like, hey, there's certain things we're just not going to be able to replicate, so let's not be ideological and let's get our practicality hat on?
1,000%. But people have to be willing to really get out the white piece of paper and start over. I do see a lot of people taking their agenda from their user conference and then literally just putting it online. It's not going to work.
It's like the TVCs we saw as YouTube and Facebook videos in the early B2C marketing ecosystem. It's funny. I've gotten more emails from friends, contemporaries, associates about marketing for the now. They're like, hey, you're really screwing me up. Your free event is so much more stacked than the thing that we're trying to sell as a conference. And I think what that makes me think about is just classic supply and demand and competition, right? Like to your point, like, you know, if I'm not going to spend millions on the catering bill in the venue, but when it comes to being able to bring the best marketers in the world together in a virtual setting, we have that leverage. And if, you know, even in the comments right now, I'm reading it, a lot of people are like, this is better than the stuff I've paid for. That's a real challenge if you don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, I think it's democratized. It's open the field for everyone. I'll say a positive on it is that if you can think it and get it right digitally, the access is incredible. So I look at it right now and think about our C-level engagement. Our C-level engagement with CEOs from around the world is up about 25% because the price of entry to say, give me 20 minutes on a Zoom or even 30 or even an hour. And it's not, can you come to New York, meet at this dinner? You know, we're able to engage, but it's how you engage. You only get that one chance to make a first impression here. And it is, I right now would say the most effective things are when you're getting 10 people or under in a highly curated digital environment and its peer group. These, you know, load a deck into a virtual, pre-record it and blast it to hundreds of thousands of people, they tend to be a sleeper.
Yeah, 100%.
Not going to work.
No. Scaling the unscalable.
Right.
Stephanie, I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy and hope you have a wonderful and healthy holiday.
You too. Great seeing you, Gary.
Take care.
Next, we welcome Kofi Amoo-Gottfried, the VP of Marketing for DoorDash. He's had a career of leading great brands, including Facebook and Bacardi, and was agency side at FCB and founder of Publicis West Africa. He's won Ad Color's Rock Star Award, and he's married to his high school sweetheart.
How are you, my friend?
Gary, what's good, man?
It's a real pleasure, Kofi, and congrats. I know it's exciting times back at the home base for your company.
Indeed.
Let's just get right into it because I've been really dying to see what your take was going to be on this. Which consumer behavior shifts will be key to driving growth in 2021 from your perspective?
Yeah, Gary, there's two that I'm thinking about. So the first is that there's like a demand for comfort, right? So we released this trend report that we do every year at DoorDash. It's called the State of Flavor. And it looked at like what people were ordering on the platform, right? So the top three things: chicken fingers and fries, chicken sandwich, and mac and cheese. But then if you looked at like what things were trending in terms of like, year over year percentages over 1,000 going into the next year, sausage, egg and cheese on a biscuit, create your own omelet, carrot cake, right? So that's just like the food category, but it was all comfort foods.
Kofi, which one of those comfort foods that you just mentioned is your personal favorite, and which one do you, and which just of those? Not your overall Kofi spectrum.
just this thing. Okay.
Which one's your favorite of that little group?
Ooh, wow. Maybe sausage, egg, and cheese on a biscuit, man.
Respect.
But I think this is a trend that we're seeing across multiple categories. I think many of you guest speakers today will be wearing like nice shirts and sweatpants, right? Like we're in this mode now.
No pants at all.
Maybe no pants at all. But we're in this mode where comfort is what people are focused on. I think, I look at categories like makeup, and you think about, we've all been sitting here and people have not been wearing makeup. So what does that mean for like when the world opens back up?
Or new clothes,
Or new clothes.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, that's sneakers. My sneaker game is whack right now.
It's gone. It's over.
Yeah.
Your sneaker game is like socks under a desk. So
I really like that. I think you nailed it.
Yeah, so I think comfort is going to be a big one. I expect to see that go on. The other one, which is on totally opposite side of this, is the demand for corporations to have a conscience, right? I mean, we've talked for years, Gary. You've seen all the reports, like consumers want to vote with their dollars and they want to align with their values. And I think that's been true, but I think it's only been true up to a point. All of us have been like, I've certainly done this. Delete Uber, and then you open the Lyft app and there's no car, and you're like, maybe I'll actually use it.
And what it also is look, when businesses at scale inherently are going to have some sort of social vulnerability.
Correct.
I mean, you can't wear a designer clothing. You can't wear clothes.
You can't do anything. That's
if you're extreme on the environment, because textiles are doing more damage than a lot of sectors.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I've been scolded for a plastic bottle by one of my friends while they're wearing a Gucci belt, and I'm like, do the math.
You're like, what are you doing?
Yeah. First, bro. And I think I think it's a very important era, because I do think this is going to come up more. However, it gets into incredibly interesting territories, because at some level, once you start picking at this, everyone's going to be vulnerable about something.
Yeah, this is exactly right. I think the thing that's interesting is, before was the vulnerability was actually confined to your core business, right? So it's like, if you're like a textiles company, I'm going to talk to you about the environment. I think the big shift that we've seen this year is that all the third rail stuff that companies could actually sit out, you can't sit out anymore, right? So for a long time, when issues of race, neutrality was a safe haven. Like, no brands were expected to speak out about race. It's like, hey, sit this one out. Like, I'll talk about environmental, I'll talk about some other thing. I will not engage on this issue. What's been fascinating this year is that silence is being interpreted as speech. So if you didn't say anything, people are going to have questions. But if you do say something and you can't back it up, and this is the point that Stephanie was making, you're going to get hammered for that as well.
The truth is, somebody said to me the other day, Gary, you talk about the same shit. I'm like, exactly. I'm very focused on talking about the things I know. And I have no interest, because I put myself so out there. I have no interest to talk about things I don't know. I need to come in with curiosity and empathy and those things. I think it's wild. Let me ask you a question. What about speed of creative? You're a more contemporary, modern company. You come from this incredible background creatively and marketing wise. Curious about your juxtaposition of your career now that you've got a couple years underneath it. My perspective coming into the industry was unconscious. I was fascinated by the lack of speed. At DoorDash, speed of especially a company that's going to understand things like CAC and LTV on an app.
That's right.
I would argue that probably a little bit more of the challenge is building top of the funnel brand because the math stuff's there. But what about the creative output? Because I think the math-based companies tend to understand a lot, except brand building in the lower funnel and not enough volume of creative, and saying a channel doesn't work when they only did 7 creative variables when there's so much more. And it's less about iterations, about ideas and creative in that world. Right. You know, knowing your background a little bit, I was like excited to ask you about this. All that I just threw at you, break that down, your perspective, what you're seeing, where you've got advancements to go at DoorDash, or what you've seen work well.
Yeah, it's a terrific question. And I think, like, to your point, you know, I grew up on the agency side where, like, you know, preciousness was the vector rather than speed and sort of
but subjective opinions.
100%.
I hate that shit. I hate that shit.
Yeah, because like that's not the answer, right? The answer is like actually figuring out what's working and what isn't. I think what's been fascinating at DoorDash is I think we found a good balance. So, you know, a really good example from earlier this year is like we turned around a fully integrated campaign in 6 days when the pandemic hit. I think we were the first major brand to go to market and say, actually, hey, the job right now is like, let's not speak about DoorDash. Let's encourage people to support all of the restaurants, whether they're doing it on our platform or on other platforms. But we turned that around in 6 days, you know, which like didn't even feel possible from a trafficking perspective. But turns out you can do that. And we did that all the way through the funnel. And I think we're figuring out working with, you know, in the bottom of the funnel, in the middle of the funnel, we have a wide variety of partners we're working with to create lots of options around creative, right? We want to have the brand consistency. We want to have the brand point of view, but we also want to like create the space to figure out what's actually working rather than assuming that we're going to have all the answers.
Finding right.
To your point.
We call it at VaynerX finding right instead of having the audacity of thinking you're right.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Talk to me about TikTok. You know, the consumer attention, you know, we're OG enough to see Facebook go from a college kids platform to a great grandparents platform.
That's right.
Are you starting to take that platform seriously?
Yeah, we are. Look, I think we started this year. I don't think we figured it out, in all honesty. I think this past year, this was the first year that we started playing on TikTok. We did some interesting stuff, again, early on in the pandemic around driving support for restaurants that resonated really well. We participated in this influencer challenge called the Do Your Part Challenge in partnership with Feeding America to drive meal donations, but also to drive restaurant support. We saw a ton of traction around that, like billions of impressions. So we know there's something there. I don't think we figured out how to do this consistently yet. So this is one of the areas that we're going to be looking at going into 21.
What about OTT commercials? You know, this really interesting evolution of Roku, Amazon Fire Stick, Hulu. You know, obviously, not every OTT has commercial infrastructure, but is that something you're spending more time thinking about? Because I see that eating up a ton of the commercial television space, but it has more DNA in Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, like buying and creative. Has that hit your radar? Is that a debate internally?
100%. We're spending a lot of time on that, Gary. Like we're finding that like those spaces are like deeply measurable.
Like Wyoming underpriced because of demand. Yeah,
correct.
Supply, you know, demand issue.
Correct.
That's good for you.
Correct.
Does that put challenges on your creative agencies to make 5 commercials that are quality for the price of what the kind of things you were accustomed to years ago? Has that pressure on the cost of creative? I mean, this all goes to one place. Creative's too expensive in the advertising world. Are you starting to have those conversations?
Yeah, I think we're trying to figure it out. Yeah, I don't know that we've cracked that particular thing yet, because I do think there's things that we want to do at a very high fidelity, right? So but then I think
the question is, does it need to cost that much?
It does not. To me, you
could make a Super Bowl spot for 100,000 that could be bonkers amazing.
That's right.
You could.
That's right.
The industry has decided you can't.
That's right.
And I wonder, with your incredible agency background and being in a more contemporary company, the reason I think this series, you can see my energy's high, A, because I respect you from afar and I'm excited to get connected, but B, I think you having one foot in both places leads to the marketers that I think are going to create change. I came so from the other place that people viewed my opinions on this as not right, wrong, bullshit, or you know, disruptor. I'm like, no, this shit's practical.
Yeah, it's just true.
And I think watching great marketers come from agencies of that kind of fidelity to go into companies like this are going to be the ones that actually drive the change. Make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I always think that like my job is to figure out how to merge the two things that like I know now, right? Like when I joined Facebook many years ago, I didn't have this like data-driven bottom of funnel. I have that now.
Correct.
And so how do you merge that with like the creativity from like Wyden and Kennedy and Bacardi and all of that? How do you bring all of that together?
This was a real pleasure.
Good to hang, Marta.
Talk to you soon.
Later.
Fired up to have Bozoma St. John, CMO of Netflix, join us next. Boz just took the role in June, previously holding C-suite roles at Endeavor, Uber, Apple, and Pepsi. She serves on the boards of Girls Who Code and Vital Voices. Welcome, Boz.
Thank you. Hey, Gary, what up?
What up, Boz? Boz, right off the bat, before I get into the actual question, what does it actually feel like to be walking around on Earth being the coolest CMO in the world, both because of who you are as the human and because of the company you get to now be at the top of from a marketing standpoint? Is it weird? Like, how you feeling out there?
Yeah, I feel like a badass. How about that?
Good
you know
for
what
you.
I'm saying? Yes. But I felt that way from birth. You know what I mean? I've been walking around this planet like I've had something to contribute to it for a very long time. So this hasn't really changed anything for me internally, although I can see from the excitement of other people that this is a pretty big deal. So I feel good about that.
Before I go into the question, one last thing. How many times have you been texted by your friends or former contemporaries or your inner circles about Queen's Gambit?
Ooh, yes, so much. I mean, first of all, you know, shocker. I mean, honestly, just a shocker, right? I think Sleepy hit, nobody knew that it was coming, but it felt pretty big pretty quickly, you know? And the fact that there are people who have like, you know, seen upticks in chess playing, the sales.
Oh, the data, the searches.
It's outrageous, but so cool that, you know, we have a young woman, right, who is star in it. And she plays a genius in this particular role is incredible. I think it's just like a testament to the fact that storytelling can change perception across culture. So dope. Period. Yes.
Which consumer behavior shifts will be key in driving growth in 2021 from your perspective?
Well, okay, so Gary, like this is the thing, is that like I am endlessly curious about people, right? I mean, it's part of the reason why I'm in marketing, because I really love consumer behavior. And this time has just been one of those where I don't think any of us have the answer, right? We're all sitting trying to figure it out day by day. It's like if you had a plan that you wrote 18 months ago, that joint is trash. You know, there's nothing, you know, I don't care who you are, how smart you think you are. If you think you know what's going to even happen 12 months from now, you are lying. You know, there's no way for us to understand that. So it's better to understand what is happening right now. Right at this very moment, like how are you paying attention? So obviously, as we're talking, marketing for the now, this is the key. You know, what is the behavior that is happening in this very moment that we could pay attention to? Now, I'm not saying it's a predictor. It's just that like, hey, open your eyes. One of them, you use this word in talking to Kofi about juxtaposition, which I actually think is such an interesting idea, that behavior is in the extremes at this moment. There are no middles. There are no middles. It's like there's this huge juxtaposition that I'm seeing in what we call like conserving, and then on the other hand, hoarding. You know, that, and I'm not like passing judgment on either one of those. It's just a behavior to—
It's an observation.
Yeah, it's like, think about this, right? All of us are at the beginning of the pandemic, and even I would say today, you know, talking about how much more we can do with less. You know, all of those memes started to rise. Like, I'm so grateful for what I have. Like, I'm thankful for this roof over my head. I'm thankful for the food I eat. Gratitude. Yeah, all of that, right? We started thinking about the things that we actually need in order to live. Do I need all this stuff? No, I don't, right? And then on the other side, it's like, oh, toilet paper, is that available? No. You know why? Because people start hoarding it. Oh my goodness, Amazon, booming business, you know, because we just keep seeing packages arrive at people's doors. Like this idea that there is no sort of middle ground, that either we're on this side or this side, and at the same damn time. Yeah. The most incredible behavior I think I've ever witnessed.
What, you know, you've been incredible. Actually, rattle it off real quick because I think it's inspiring. Rattle off the places you've been leading up marketing over the last 5 or 6 years.
Oh gosh, well, 5 or 6. Let's see, Beats Music, acquired by Apple. Then I helped to create Apple Music, ran iTunes, also movies, books, and news. And then Endeavor. I'm sorry, Uber. Ooh, look, I'm forgetting Uber, then Endeavor, and now at Netflix.
So you've been at these very progressive, very, iconic companies. What's been most different about Netflix from even those really progressive companies that you've been at? What was the first, I always think it's cool when you get under the hood. Obviously, you know all about it. You decide to take the job. You go through your due diligence. They tell you, you've got your intuition. You are extremely to the pulse, which is why you and I have been friends for so long. But now you walk in and virtually, I guess these days, the halls, what's the big observation of like, oh.
Yeah. You know what? Okay. So caveat is that I've been at the job for 4 months.
Right. So, you're still tasting.
Exactly. Yeah. And also not in the building. Right.
Yeah.
So I actually really love the culture of Netflix. It's much written about. Clearly, it's like even Reed just, published a book, The No Rules Rules, right? Which talks about a Netflix culture. I just think it's a fascinating place to be in that there really are the empowered people that are inside of the company doing the things that they do because they are truly the best at what they do, and that this empowerment allows for freedom to actually make changes and make decisions about the business in ways that I have never seen before. I think it's a really big point, especially as we look at like the future of corporate cultures. Clearly, as we've just said, I've been in a lot of places, where hierarchy is important, where you have to get alignment. My favorite word when it comes to work, because it's like, alignment is like the death of good ideas. It's like, oh my God.
It's back to what we were talking about with speed, the elimination. Speed.
Yes.
Business is sports. And if speed is not part of your equation, you are vulnerable.
Listen, all the way vulnerable, because honestly, it's like, and then why do you have people that you don't empower? Like why
hire them?
Like why? If they've got to ask for permission for every single thing they do, then you're not actually like utilizing them to the best of their ability. And so for me, it's been a really incredible time in the last 4 months, even though really strange, because starting a job like this in the pandemic is just like ridiculously crazy. I mean, it's literally so wild. It's like, I remember I was having this conversation with Ted, and he was like, well, folks who try something new in this pandemic, especially a big job, he was like, I think those are the ones who like are the most adventurous, the ones who might win. So I was like, oh God, I hope that comes true for me. But it's been really, really interesting. I think for lots of people who are trying to refine who they are, and redefine it, and perhaps even try something new that like, perhaps we are the crazy ones. And that's the beauty.
I agree. Let me do some rapid fire in my last 2 minutes. I'm going to throw a couple things that are very contemporary. I'd love to get your hot takes. Where do you stand on influencer marketing?
Oh, I always think it's good, but like, what is this buzzword that we're using? Influencers are just people who are closer to the center of the heat of the thing. And that thing could be anything. It could be cooking, and it could be shoes. It could be fashion. It could be medicine. But the thing is that like we've created this idea and this meme as if they're only the cool kids. And that's not, influencers are not just the cool kids. Influencers are the people who are closest to the heat.
I agree. And then when you contextualize it, for example, if Queen's Gambit had an influencer campaign, before that movie comes out, the chess influencers on Instagram are not necessarily the cool kids, but they're the relevant kids.
That's absolutely right. Yes, they are at the center, and that's what influence is all about.
What do you think about SMS marketing? We've all as American consumers have protected our text number, but we're starting to see it, and I've been surprised, but it's starting to open up. Thoughts on that?
Oh, personalization is key. It's like, I don't care if it's SMS or email or Facebook paid social. It's like, if you're not personalizing to me, then I don't want to see that trash. So
bring value.
I'm like, listen, let's not do the mass message thing.
Do you think
find a way to make it personal?
Do you think that that's one of the bigger vulnerabilities of television commercials? They have to be vanilla and they're trying to reach everyone, thus to reaching nobody?
Yes, absolutely. It's like the TV ad and billboards and all of the mass media type of spaces are supposed to be the anchor. They're supposed to be the big one that's like, okay, now that you have context for what I'm about to tell you, now I'm going to tell you why it's important to you. And so therefore now SMS, email, like any other social, like I just said, any other place where I can get more personal, that's to help to get to the center of what I want to communicate with you.
Do you think we've gotten to such a, digital personal world that the costs associated with that anchor, the production costs and the distribution costs of those things are really expensive. Thoughts on the price value of that these days?
No, not really. I mean, the thing is that it still holds true, right? It's like you're still getting a lot of reach for the for the media. And so I don't think the price issue is a problem. I just think that we've got to reevaluate the priorities. What is going to be the most important thing? Is it that I want lots of reach? I want lots of coverage everywhere?
What happens when you're Netflix and you have that kind of awareness?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that the awareness is not just about the brand, but now you got to have awareness on titles, like all of the shows. And listen, it's like, if you don't know what Queen's Gambit is, now I got to go tell you. So that's
good news for you and your company. Almost everybody knows what Queen's Gambit is. It's such a pleasure. I'm cheering for you daily.
Oh, thank you, Gary. Same.
Next up, we've got Michelle Peluso, the CMO of IBM and SVP of Digital Sales.
Hey, Gary, how are you?
Is responsible for billions of revenue and accountable for demand generation with a team across 100 countries. Prior to IBM, Michelle was CEO of Guild, Global Marketing and Internet Officer of Citigroup, and CEO of Travelocity. She's won too many awards to mention. Welcome, Michelle.
Hello, hello. So excited to be here. And that was so much fun listening to Kofi and Boz.
Thank you, Michelle. So you've had an incredible career. I'm so glad we're getting this time together because we haven't had the luxury to jam too much. So first, it's great to see you. Thank you for doing this.
Same.
Let's get right into it, and then we'll side dish. Let's get right into the meat. And from your perspective, Michelle, what are the consumer behaviors, the shifts, and the keys to driving business in 2021 that are unique to where we're going?
Look, the amazing thing about this year is every company on the planet has had to become digital overnight.
Yes.
It's an extraordinary thing. We've been talking about this for so many years, and to see now literally every industry, every company become digital overnight is incredible. And you know what, Gary, it's not just the consumer apps, the mobile device, the website. It's actually the supply chain, the factory, manufacturing. I mean, all these things have had customer service. All these fundamental parts of companies have had to digitize overnight. And that, that's actually a tremendous thing when you think about it. That won't change. Not only is that affecting, of course, consumer behavior, it's affecting all the back-end processes of companies, but even more, think about how much data, think about the explosion of data that this provides for marketers. And it's that marriage, that Kofi, that juxtaposition he was talking about, this like deep data-driven marketing with the creative, the brand, the purpose, the empathy, the curiosity, the authenticity. So it's really been a remarkable year for companies and certainly for marketers.
What do you think about in contemporizing such an iconic brand like IBM?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. 109-year-old tech company. When does that?
It's like, I think it's the coolest because I'm a nostalgia history kind of human. But I have I think about every time I do things like this, I'm like, what would I do if I had that job? Yeah. And I think, Watson has been an incredible contemporary driver for people that are paying attention for IBM. But in general, it is a fun challenge.
Yeah, for sure. How do you keep this brand, fresh after 109 years of being a high-tech company? I mean, what other high-tech company has existed for 109 years?
No.
I think a few things. Number one, it's never really been about what we sell. I mean, we sold cheese slicers and counters and clocks. Obviously, now it's about cloud and artificial intelligence and quantum computing and blockchain. So it can't be anchored. The brand isn't anchored on what we sell. The brand is anchored on changing how the world works era after era. And the values. I mean, there's so many things about IBM that, no brand can exist for all these years without being authentic. And so, all sorts of things. Like in 1953, our CEO wrote policy letter number 4. We would never discriminate against any person based on race, sex, identification. Our pay equity rules for the company were in place in the 1930s. So there's certain values that are part of who IBM is, how we operate in the world that, era after era after era are still true. And that's what's exciting from a brand challenge.
When I look at your title, Digital Sales and CMO, it excites me because I grew up in an environment where I was a natural entrepreneur and marketer, but my dad had a liquor store and I had to care about sales every day. Sasha Vaynerchuk wasn't fooling around. He didn't care what my marketing looked like. He wanted to know how much champagne sold that day. You know what I mean? But because it was a family business, I knew my dad would die in that building when he was 100 years old. Hopefully, I always cared about brand because I knew I would eventually leave and do my own thing. And I wanted that brand to like get him to that, you know. I love that.
We share that passion for entrepreneurship, and we also share entrepreneur fathers. So my dad was also an entrepreneur and built a business, and I sat around his kitchen table as he talked about clients and people. I mean, Gary, he would grill us, you know, before the company picnic. Michelle, what's the name of Sally's little boy?
I love that.
What's the name of Jamie's
daughter?
And so I grew up with this passion for.
So talk to me about, you know, I find a lot of CMOs are either really strong at one or the other. Very strong at brand.
I think the best have to be both. And
I agree.
Most of my career, I've been a CEO. So I've sat in that seat most of my career, you know, and so I think it gives you a perspective of like, well, what are the levers of the P&L? How do you make this company work? How do you bring diverse skills, creative, analytical, legal, sales, tech, you know, development? How do you bring that together? So I just have, I think Bo said this so well, that curiosity, that passion for, you know, really trying to understand what the night sky looks like from different sides of the world, and a deep, abiding belief that the best CMOs, you know, are not at the table because they're a CMO, they're at the table because they're an advisor on how to best grow and position the business for all stakeholders. So that's exciting, right? That's a huge remit.
Talk to me about LinkedIn creative. You know, when I think about your business, I think the biggest elephant in the room in all of marketing is the lack of advancements in LinkedIn marketing by B2B companies. It feels to me very similar to what I lived through in 2012 and 13 on Facebook for consumer brands. LinkedIn over the last 3 to 4 years has clearly become more of a content and social network. The paid capabilities are remarkable, though they're expensive in comparison to other platforms, but I always tell people, but they're more valuable customers.
Right? So sometimes it justifies that cost. But look, in the past few interviews, you're poking on a few really important issues. There is nothing about this year that says that we should do things the same next year. You know, we had to pull all of our creative down in a matter of days in the middle of the pandemic. We were up with new creative, a new platform, fully shot, fully produced, media trafficked in 11 days. And actually that stuff was at, you know, of course, a fraction of the cost and performing better than, you know, some of our ads previously. So you've been poking on this in each of those discussions.
The cost.
Can we do it differently? Can we take the cost down? If we do that, can have hyper-personalized creative, and then places like LinkedIn become really powerful, right? Because the point about LinkedIn is you have got to personalize. You have so much rich information about what company this person's at, what their job role is, what they're interested in, what their profile looks like. You don't get that on TV. You don't get that in print, right? So it's highly valuable, but the only way to make the economics really work is if actually you have a cost-effective model on the creative side that can match that personalization with the right person. So I think that's some of the breakthroughs we've all got to, you know, really triumph, frankly, in 2021 and beyond.
Michelle, quick little thing here for the last 2 minutes, because I see a lot of people being inspired by your career. How does somebody think about getting into big business? There's a lot of people watching right now that are in my community who have an entrepreneurial flair, but I also am pushing so much around self-awareness, and a lot of them are realizing, wait a minute, I am not an entrepreneur, but I want to be a big dog in these companies. What do you tell young people? What do you tell the people that reach out to you for mentorship? What's a good thing to think about? A little hack for 2021 to give them a little extra leverage to break into marketing or operations in Fortune 5,000 companies.
Yeah, great question. You know, when you're young in your career, the most important thing I think is to surround yourself with people you're going to learn from. Be curious and surround yourself with people you're going to learn from. And I stress that because when I really think about my career, there's so many people I can point to who got me from here to there, who had the honesty to sit me down and be like, Michelle, you know, this isn't good enough. You could do better. What if you done it this way? Like, what if you tried? There's so many people I emulated, so many people I watched, and I'm so grateful that I chose wisely, frankly. I had amazing mentors and bosses and colleagues, and I was a sponge. You know, nobody worked harder and nobody served me more. And that served me well in my entrepreneurial career. That curiosity, that desire to surround myself with great people, that work ethic. And it's really served me well in my kind of big company career as well. So I think that, you know, be a sponge, be curious, and really, I remember my very first job offer. I had an offer from McKinsey, an offer from BCG, and the McKinsey offer treated me as a consultant, much more money, much more prestige. BCG, a lot less, because they didn't treat my Oxford degree as a graduate degree. I took the BCG because I knew I would learn faster and learn more because of the people there. So I really highly prioritize, make sure the number one deciding factor is, are you around people who are going to teach you to get better and be a sponge?
I love it. Michelle, thank you for your time.
Great to see you. Take care.
Excited to welcome Deborah Wahl, Global CMO of General Motors. Deborah was appointed in 2019, previously serving as the Global CMO of Cadillac. Prior to joining GM, Deborah served as the SVP and CMO of McDonald's, proudly bringing us all-day breakfast. She's held leadership roles at Pulte Group, Chrysler, and Lexus. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you so much. Great to be here. Hi, Gary.
Hey, Deborah. This is like the Mount Rushmore of like marketing. Andrea, I'm really proud of you. This is crazy. Deborah, it is so great to see you. What is, in your opinion, the opportunities, the shifts, the things that big companies and small companies need to be thinking about to really win the day in 2021? What is the emerging opportunity from your purview?
So I think if 20 taught us anything, it was we got to really stay close to customers, and that everything's changing super fast. And so it's almost on a day by day, week by week basis that we're evolving. And I think the opportunity is that's changed everything, especially in larger companies, small companies as well, I'm sure. I'll just speak from my experience, but we have this thing that we talk about now that's called ventilator time. You know, when there was that need for ventilators, we got them to market in like 18 days from the first meeting to when we set up the whole supply chain and assembly line to do them. So that has now been sort of the call to action for everything. I think that's going to go further. In marketing, we've always had this thing that we've always been like, we're behind the customer. We all have to get ahead of the customer, right? So I think now we're operating at speed with the customers.
How do we do that in big companies? You know, I came into this industry because I couldn't agree with what you just said more. I'm like, my God, this brief to creative, to television, down to matching luggage on digital. I mean, this takes forever. I was like a foreign alien to this process. And to be frank, it hasn't changed so remarkably in 12 years. Deborah, do you think 2020 is a tipping point where context, speed, and relevance? I mean, you have a massive brand in General Motors. I have empathy for top of the funnel stuff, the stuff we spoke with Bose. Yeah. But my point is, your cars are known at it, but the relevancy is the issue. Do you think the agency, the internal, the job description, like what is it really going to take for this industry to get faster? Because everyone's hyped about what happened in 2020, but I'm not seeing the systematic change that's required to actually win on speed and relevance.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. You know, going through the arc of a career, you think, all right, we were really big on just brand ideas 25 years ago. Then we went through this whole thing that efficiencies and costs and all this analysis and everything became priorities, and it really slowed things down. And now I think we're finding the balance. I don't think everyone's mastered it at all yet, but we're certainly pushing where suddenly we're unleashing things so that we can just get stuff done, because that's the priority now. And we're good at being efficient, and we're good at, you know, taking costs out of systems, and we're kind of whittling down all those things. And certainly data platforms, et cetera, have helped us so that we know we're being more efficient. So I think it's in a whole different mindset. And then what I think our experience in, you know, work from home has actually pulled all of us together closer so that we're more unified on what we're getting done, because we just don't have time to mess around. You know, you don't have all the time where you were in the office and you could have meetings and things like that. Suddenly it's much more precious and urgent that we're all focused and aligned on the same thing so that we're going faster, and that unleashes all kinds of time. So
on a product like a car that has the difference between buying a vehicle from General Motors and buying all-day breakfast at McDonald's, you couldn't be. This is what I love about your career. One has one of the longest lead times, right, and path and journey, and the other has one of the fastest. Break that down for me, because I think there might be some fun insights in that. I think it can help certain senior marketers that might be hesitant to switch to a different kind of, consumer consideration path. Maybe you can give them some encouragements or what you learned or what you stubbed your toe on.
Yeah, I say I've always gone from Maslow's hierarchy all the way up and down. I have shelter at homes, I've got food, I've got, mobility, all that. But, the constant from the whole constant is creating value and understanding what your consumers really need and how the heck you get it to them faster and in a different way than anyone else. And what was interesting about McDonald's, I always say I went from patties to caddies, and I love that idea. But the interesting thing about McDonald's is there is so much robust professionalism in the whole process. It is almost as hard and takes that kind of engineering knowledge to efficiently get a whole meal to market in the time frame that it does there as when we're building a car. It's incredible. It takes a really lot of testing and understanding. So I think as long as you're focused on the core values and understand what consumers value that they'll actually part with their dollar for, that's the common thing. And then marketing is exciting because we're just innovating all the time. We've got to think about how to do it in a different way, different from anyone else, and where to go. So I find enormous flexibility. That's why I love this industry, this career, everything that we do. It never stops being challenging and exciting.
Talk to me about audio. What do you think the place of podcasts or even getting information from Alexa or Google Home, is that starting to hit your radar? I'm trying to think of like some new topics to talk about in this show for today's episode. I was curious about your point of view on that.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're looking, well, first of all, I think our whole media mix has changed dramatically, and everything that we've gone through has accelerated that change. People aren't in their cars all the time, so I don't get my favorite podcasts anymore like I used to on all the drives, but I do find incredible value in how they're doing it. So, I mean, we just did a new opportunity with Carlos Watson and Ozzy that's really fascinating. With Axios, I mean, I think you're looking at these multi-channel ways that people are getting out the daily updates and the other content that people are clicking on and finding their time and making their time for. But what's important in all that is it's new ways of engaging at a deeper level than a 30-second commercial and everything. You spend, a half hour to an hour with a podcast on topics. So we're following that incredibly. I think our whole media mix as we've gone to following the person is changing dramatically.
Theme that keeps coming up, cost of creative. What's your hot take on that?
So two pieces of it.
Please.
Storytelling. Still even more important now than before.
Always.
And I do find that when you put more into the story, that people get a lot more out of it. They want that extra. So I don't mind cost in that area at all. I do think
you consider that the ideation part, or do you consider that the actual making of it part?
Both, because I think sometimes in production values are important in telling the story in a really good way. I mean, we're asking everyone to get so much better at telling everything visually. You don't want to necessarily read or see a chart, something. You have to tell it visually, and that requires some potentially more. But on the other hand, we're also looking at how are we so much more efficient. One piece of content goes in 1,000 different places, and so, and I'm sure everyone's saying the story, the minute we do any story and we're doing anything, we have to envision that it's going to go in 100 places, not just in one medium. And I think that's where we come back to get the efficiencies out. The other thing is we learned in the pandemic when everyone had to shut down production 100%, that the more we had in the bank that was prepared, that was ready to go, the better off we were. So those brands that had that got a lot further. And that's probably a wise thing to do, because the one thing we know for sure is that I don't think the roller coaster is going to end anytime soon.
What about you, the human being, the Deborah, as a social media consumer? What platforms do you have and enjoy, if any?
My favorite is actually LinkedIn now.
That's a lot of content.
Yeah, because it's just it's less about the whole ego idolatry of some of the other things that we see, and it's just great way to see what everyone's doing, catching up.
You find it more informative and educational?
I do, and I don't find it with all the bias and all the different, all the political disparity and everything that's going on right now in so many of the other platforms. So I get very excited about that.
My boss just jumped in, so I'm going to have to go, Deborah, but I had a lot of fun.
Are we done already?
We're done. It goes 10 minutes. It goes fast, Deborah.
Thank you,
Have
Deborah.
a wonderful holiday.
All right, thanks. Bye.
We welcome next Suki Sandhu, the CEO and founder of Odless and Involve. Suki is one of the leading specialists in sourcing exceptional, diverse talent and growing it, and has been a game changer for almost 20 years. And he was awarded an Obie from the Queen. Welcome, Suki.
Hello, everyone. Hi.
Suki, it's great to see you. How are you?
I'm good. Very good. I brought the Queen with me behind me, you know, as a real guest.
I'm a little bit concerned. I expect the, you know, Scotland Yard to come in there and like take you. I think you're kidnapping the Queen is very high risk.
She's like my guardian angel. She's been with me for years.
Suki, let's get right into the meat of the conversation. Which consumer behavior shifts will be key to driving growth in 2021, or what are the opportunities that you're seeing from your different purviews?
Yeah, it's interesting. So 2020 has been a really tough year for everyone. I think everyone is just waiting to get to the holiday break. And I think what we've learned this year that we've had two pandemics to deal with. We've had the pandemic with COVID, and then the pandemic of racism with Black Lives Matter and the protests. And I think it's been an awakening year for everyone. So I think 2021 is definitely going to be about taking action and being held accountable for your actions. And it's the consumers or employees who are going to make this action happen. So for me, learning was this year. Next year is about seeing action and seeing brands actually taking action on diversity and inclusion.
How much do you think the consumer are keyboard warriors? This is really, you know, I was really excited that you were going to be part of this because I wanted to tap into your brain on this one. When I say keyboard warriors, I mean, they pontificate on social media of what they're going to do to Hershey's if they don't do but then their actions in reality, you know, I think back to BP having the big oil spill, or Exxon, or Tylenol, Perrier. There's a lot of history in consumer behavior of voicing things, but then not acting on them. Is that something that you are thinking about, seeing? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Gary, I think what you're talking about is about being an inclusive brand. And being an inclusive brand is about being authentic. So for instance, your CEO can't make a grand statement about supporting BLM if they have no Black representation in the leadership team or the board.
That's
so
right.
if you think somewhere like Adidas, for instance, who have built a lot of their brand success on African-American sports stars, yet less than 5% of the US employees are Black. And they were called out really strongly for that in the wake of BLM.
And Suki, to me, the question is, does that have we seen the indication that that is affecting their business? Because that's what I've been interested about. There's the reverse of it. We've seen so much canceling on both sides of the political spectrum. And then when you look under the hood, you know, you're not seeing the mapping yet. I do think, you know, you're seeing, it's actually stunning to me how little you're seeing on the mapping for how much people are talking. And it goes back to words are cheap. And I was curious if you had any insights or historical references or intuitions or points of view on that phenomenon.
Yeah, because well, if you think about
it, the Yeezys are selling out.
Yeah, no, but I would say that when when companies, well, consumers, I suppose, are boycotting brands, so they're not buying the product, it's not just about the revenues. It's about the other impact it has on the reputation, on their ability to attract talent, and obviously their ability to retain them. Because consumers are also their employees. So whatever consumers are thinking, I don't think businesses can really avoid what's happening in the market in terms of responding to BLM, thinking about representation in their own business, or things like companies being accused of pink washing, where they add the rainbow brand to their brand for Pride Month, but then they might not have policies that protect LGBT employees, such as trans inclusion or same-sex benefits. I mean, shockingly, in the US, for instance, there are still 15 states where you can legally be allowed to fire someone for being LGBT+, which I think is outrageous. So I think actually employees and the activism that we're seeing in the market is they're not afraid of holding CEOs and leadership teams accountable. And they do boycott brands. Even something like Dolce & Gabbana, for instance, where
I remember
a few years ago where they said, you know, gay couples having babies via IVF were synthetic.
Yep.
I mean, I personally will never buy anything from that brand. And actually, their sales did plummet after that. I'd rather buy it Burberry.
So growing up as a kid, what kind of activities did brands do to capture your attention? And then as a grown up, what kind of thing? So juxtaposition that. Like, what do you think you were drawn to from age 1 to 20? If you rewind your personal consumer behavior, and what have you been attracted to, or what do you look for? What catches your eye? Obviously, you and I are spending some time up here in a very serious and important conversation up here, but even going down to the lightest things of like color schemes or placement or social media content or digital TV? When you hear that question, how do you think?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because when I grew up in a very strict Indian household. So my dad came to the UK when he was 6 in the 60s. So I would say I didn't really have any perception of brands. If anything, like being a working class family, it was about kind of saving every penny that you could. And it was very much a culture of saving rather than spending.
More utility, right? Food, clothes, utility. Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then obviously, as I started to earn in my early 20s and working, obviously that's when I wanted to spend. But being a working class boy, like buying even designer clothes, I buy it in the sale because I feel like I've got my parents at each shoulder telling me, don't you dare buy that new season blazer from Burberry. So I think and now I've moved into an era where I've just turned 40. And this year I promised to be more sustainable. I was thinking I didn't need to buy lots of clothes because I have a great wardrobe. And then when you're seeing brands like Patagonia, for instance, where, you know, they did a campaign just for Black Friday recently about don't buy this jacket because they were trying to get consumers to consider purchases and the environmental impact and championing sustainability. So for me, like, I feel like that for me, it's about trying to save the planet. And I think a lot of consumers think in that way too.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly so much evolution. The most interesting thing about consumers is they never stay put. It's always moving. What about communication portals? What do you think the opportunities are in 2021 from platforms? How should they be thinking about platforms? You know, whether it's digital, whether it's traditional. You know, you've brought up Burberry a couple of times. You know, and the blazer. You know, the fashion industry, runway show. Like, what are you feeling in the general marketing sphere is opportunistic in 2021?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I was nodding furiously when Deborah mentioned LinkedIn.
Yes.
And being one, and it's definitely my favorite platform. And I feel like it's one where it's grown massively over the last 5 years alone. I feel like it's underutilized because it's certainly a great marketing tool. If you think about professionals that have disposable income, I'm amazed that brands don't use it more to try and like sell their products. So I'm available for paid partnerships with Burberry if they want me to. Like, seriously, I'm there. Like, I'm the biggest fan. But it's interesting, you don't see it used as much. And I think that is something that will change because they're talking to people that have spare cash, like business people that have got jobs and they're earning.
You know, back to the bigger point you're making, you feel like if Burberry takes a substantial social misstep, that you'll have the tear go down your eye because you love the product so much, but where you are at 40 years young, because you look insane, by the way. You look like my son and I'm 45. You know, do you feel like you have a little bit of that tear in your eye, but you're at that place in your life's journey where that is the primary and you'll have to go to a different brand?
Well, no, well, actually a really good example, because we talk negatively about brands, but Burberry is actually a really good example where a few years ago, Christopher Bailey, who was the CEO, openly gay CEO, 100, the only one, he dedicated his last collection to the queer community, and he had the rainbow going through lots of the different people, all of you, exactly. And that brought a tear to my eye because he overlooked the commercial implications of supporting the queer community, given where they sell their product, Middle East, Russia, China. He didn't care about the implications it would have for sales. For him, it was about supporting the queer community, being visible, and then also donating a percentage of those profits to charities that actually need it and support LGBT plus youth. For me, that's activism. That's being visible.
But when you're a company and the fashion textile industry, as you know, has data against what it does to the environment, you know, if your best friend is skewing extremely passionate environment, you know, I have friends who just don't buy designer because their biggest issue is textiles in, you know, gas and others, obvious, but this industry is doing an enormous amount of damage. The real interesting question for me over the next 20 years, as consumers become so awake, is will businesses always have some vulnerability and then people are choosing and picking like we do in every issue?
But this textiles piece is around sustainability, and it's not just luxury; it's also fast fashion.
I agree.
There was a huge scandal in the UK about Boohoo, who was selling their clothes for like 99 pence. Like, if you think about taking that through the supply chain, how much are those people in Asia being paid to produce these products? It's outrageous. And obviously, this is the interesting thing, where although we'll have a big scandal about it, people will still buy it in their pounds, like buying all these products. And it's just confusing what consumers will do and what they won't.
I think that's an incredible way to end it. Suki, thank you so much for your expertise.
Great to meet you.
Such a pleasure.
Next, we welcome EC Eggleston-Bracey, the COO and EVP of Beauty and Personal Care at Unilever. EC currently leads the $5 billion beauty and personal care portfolio, and she founded Dove's Crown Coalition to eradicate hair discrimination through support of the Crown Act legislation. She's also held top roles at Coty and P&G and has been recognized with numerous awards. Welcome, EC.
Hi, thank you for having me. Good to talk to you, Gary.
Always good to see you, EC. Let's get right into it. You know, especially being at the helm of such a big piece of business, which consumer behavior shifts will be key to driving growth in 2021. When you think about the upcoming year with all these incredible products under this category that you run, where do you see the biggest opportunity? And then on the flip side, what's giving you the most agita of like, you know, we're a big company and I don't think I'm going to be able to move fast enough on this thing and I need to find some sort of hack or solution?
Yeah, I think what we will continue to see and will become even more relevant is the area of wellness and in self-care. You know, your guest earlier today, Suki and Deborah, we keep talking about the pandemic. You know, Suki talked about 2 pandemics. I'd say there's 4. There's the health pandemic, there's the racial inequity pandemic, there's the economic crisis, and then there's the crisis of divisiveness in total we saw living through the election. So because of all these things, we are under an incredible amount of stress, all of us. I think something like 55% of consumers say, I have more stress than I've ever had on a daily basis. So what we have to do in terms of being of service and helping people is helping them take care of themselves. And when I think about self-care through wellness, it's 2 parts to it. There's a functional part, which is hygiene and the categories that I lead in skin cleansing and in hair and deodorants and skincare. There's the functional part, and we have a range of new products to address that. And I can go through what those are. The emotional part. And the emotional part comes from identity, being comfortable in your own skin. You know, things like Dove's Crown Act help with that. Making sure you're welcome and included. But it's also that you have moments of time out for yourself. And again, in the markets that I lead, you know, there's a lot you can do in the shower to get away from the kids who are schooling at home.
True.
Private time in the shower and products that make a difference there. Help you change your hairstyle, a little bit of, just a little bit of perk up in your skin. So wellness and self-care for sure.
I like that. Talk to me about something that's been a big theme today, which is speed. How do you feel about internally and with the external partners that you're working with in a 2021 world? What do you feel like you sit on speed, and how do you feel about speed?
Yeah, from a speed perspective, I actually would first reflect to 2020.
Okay.
I always say crisis breeds invention.
Yes.
And I have seen, you know, my business is about $5 billion in sales, you know, hundreds of people on the marketing team. I have seen the enterprise move like never before. We literally launched into Suave hand sanitizers in less than 6 weeks. It was not even in our realm of what we were planning to do. And I watched us cut through all the process that we would typically use to make this happen. So the question really is, so for me, I keep saying we've taught the elephant how to dance, and then we've done it over and over again in other areas. We've now have a product I really love is Dove Nourishing hand sanitizer. It's like this hand sanitizer is like putting lotion on your hands. It's unbelievable. And that was something that was on our plan, but 2 years out. And we ended up doing that in less than a year. And it's really a technical innovation. So it's like we've shown the elephant can dance. How do we keep the elephant dancing? Because we're all looking for that relief. We've cut corners, we've moved really fast. It's now how do we make that in our way of working? So you asked, how do I feel about speed in 2021? I feel like we've demonstrated we can move fast. Now we're like cracking our ongoing systemic ways of working so that we can lean into those behaviors we exhibited that bypass the system. So it's now actually the system.
Talk to me about cost of creative. You know, what's the conversations, the things you're thinking about going into 2021 around the notion of production cost? That was a big topic over the last 6 to 9 months. I've heard from a lot of people, just the brief to the idea, all those meeting hours. Is that a conversation that you're going into with 2021?
I think in 2021, we continue to want cut through. And I think what is in today's world, you can't necessarily associate cut through with cost. And Gary, you know this in what you do. There's so many ways to disrupt without great cost. And there are ways that you need to disrupt that take a lot of cost depending on what the idea is. So we are putting a currency on the idea and cut through. And in that cut through, it's really authenticity. And sometimes, and again, Gary, this is what you do. And to get that cut through, many times authenticity, it's user-generated content. You know, it's someone with the camera. So it's less about policing production cost. It's really driving impact overall, really using the full stream of tools and assets that are available to us.
In your category, influencer marketing is just a wildly big and important conversation. I think it's an early one. So I'm fascinated to get your perspective on how you're thinking about that genre in general.
Yeah, influencer marketing, I think, continues to evolve. And, you know, what you've heard a lot, and I know you also know, is authenticity is so important. So there was once influencer marketing, which was pay to play. And as consumers and people, were smart. We want people that are generally connected and committed. And when we find generally committed fans who speak on behalf of a brand, it matters. So it continues to be an important part, but it's not a pay for play. So you see micro influencers, nano influencers that are really credible. And then when you have macro influencers, they're ones that have some legitimacy in the space, in the product, in the category, and not just I have a big name, let's use that to drive influence.
What's the biggest observation? What was the biggest dotting the I or crossing the T for you, intuition going into 2020 that the pandemic or some of the things you spoke to in the first couple minutes here really solidified, like, okay, I had a hunch, but this is really what I believe?
Yeah, for me, 2020 was all about, and I'm going to say, human centricity. So, you know, we forever have been talking about in marketing being consumer centric. And, you know, Unilever is a company that believes it's what you do, it's not what you say. So we believe in purpose. 2020 has so solidified that for me, because when you think about people as consumers, you're ignoring everything else in their life. What we consume, how we interact with products is one little slice of our lives. When we think about who we are as humans, and then in that context, how we consume products and how we can help with all those issues, we grow. We create impact. And why 2020 really solidified that for me is we're all dealing with so much in our lives. It's so far beyond just how am I washing my hands, right? What do I want on my hair? It's how it fits into the whole life. So arguably that's always been there, but we keep talking consumer centricity, the human centricity. And then it's what problems we can solve that are outside of the product, in the product, but what we do. And again, I use Dove Crown Act as an example of that. On my Dove men's business, Dove Men Plus Care, we're actually also partnering with the National Basketball Players Association to help end harmful stereotypes that actually kill Black men. So we have a partnership with them where we are highlighting the athletes and who they are as humans, not just as athletes, to change mindsets and behaviors. And that's another example of human centricity. So we've really made a commitment across brands. I've given two. I could give you a dozen of examples, and that will continue to be front and center for us on how we help with all the problems and use our product to help provide the wellness and the self-care that I mentioned earlier through hand sanitization, but also a moment of time out. I don't know if I mentioned we're launching a new brand we just launched with Walmart called Find Your Happy Place. We're all confined today.
That's the name of the brand?
It's called Find Your Happy Place.
I like
and
that.
So it's catching the sunrise. It's under the starlit sky. You know, there are moments because we want to escape. So that's another way we can use our product to help with what we want, right? We want to get out of the house or out of the house, home for holidays, but also take the time to help with bigger issues.
You see, little fun one on the way out. What is the favorite social network for you, the human, on your phone?
Yeah, I heard your earlier guest talk about LinkedIn. For me, it's IG, it's Instagram. And it's because I'm incredibly visual. I can just get quick information. I get a sense for what's going on without the depth, and then I can go into the depth. So for me, my go-to is still IG.
I love it. And I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. Ciao.
Bye. Yes, Andrea?
Next, we welcome Brad Anderson, Corporate VP of Microsoft 365. Brad has built 4 separate billion-dollar businesses at Microsoft, including 2 from scratch. Brad hosts a video series, The Ship Room, which is an IT staple, and a weekly live.
All right, Brad, I don't think you're going to get the full intro here. I think Andrea's having Wi-Fi problems, but we'll get into it. It's good to see you, brother. How are you?
Hey, fantastic. It's great to be here. You know, I'm sitting here listening to all these amazing people talk and thinking to myself, wow, you've got all these chief marketing officers, and I'm kind of the geeky engineering leader here who happens to have a big social presence and following that I get to do a lot of things with. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Before we get into it, that picture behind you is remarkable, and kudos on that. Talk about a win. That's gorgeous.
Yeah, actually, you know, it's funny. 5 children, 3 grandchildren, 2 more on the way. So I stay busy at home and I stay busy at work. Hey, but let's jump.
When did you start having children? 12? You look amazing to have 3 grandchildren.
You're kind. No, it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun, and it's amazing.
Right.
Hey, let's
go into it. What's your perspective from your purview on consumer behavior 2021? What are the opportunities? What are the shifts? What are the key things that companies need to be thinking about?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I sit in this unique place where I get a chance to see how organizations and people work. And then you can take that insight, you can translate to how do the changes in how people work, how does that then translate into not only their consumer changes, but how all the organizations that service them change. So, you know, Microsoft, we build what's called Office 365. Most people probably use it at work. It's hundreds of millions of users. And I build all the management and security around that. So as you can imagine, we do a ton of research on how orgs and people work. And I'll tell you, in March and April of this year, we saw multiple years of cultural change happen in how orgs work in 2 months. And those changes will not only have profound impacts on the organizations, but it's going to have a profound impact on all the organizations that service, you know, the employees and the orgs themselves. So let me just kind of lay it out for you for a minute. You know, like at March 12th at Microsoft, we sent everybody home. So, you know, on March 11th, 5% of the company was working remote. On March 12th, 98% was working from home. And that was common around the world. You know, we all live on virtual meetings like we're doing right now, no travel. But all those things contributed to just people work in a different way now. And so you take those changes and say, all right, what's going to happen when the crisis is over and we come into a new normal? What is it going to look like? First of all, travel is going to drop dramatically from a business perspective. You know, I was reading some research that Bill Gates had put out, and his view, travel is going to reduce by more than 50%. And that makes sense to me. I think we've learned that we can have meaningful conversations like this over video. And, you know, before when we were going to close a big deal, one of us had to go out and travel and seal the deal in person. You can now do that over video. Second, you know, how many people are going to want to work from home going forward? You know, the research that we show, 50% of people want to work from home 2 or 3 days a week. I hear CIOs telling me things like on any given day as they plan for the future, 50% of the company will be in the office. And it's going to be a different 50% every day. How's that going to change things? I'll come back and give some observations on that. And then finally, if you think about it, if half your people are working from home or remotely, every meeting is going to be a virtual meeting like what we're on right now. It's, you know, kind of gone are the days when everyone's going to be in the same room. So now translate that. How does that then impact changes in the market? You know, first of all, travel, hospitality, all those businesses have got to think differently about how they thrive because business travel is their most lucrative business. That's a 100%. Fundamental change for them.
Huge.
You know, think about all of the businesses that what they do for a living is they support other businesses, whether that's meals, maintenance, you know, cleaning, whatever the case may be, is the amount of office space that's going to be in use is going to drop. You know, I hear organizational leaders telling me that they think they can free up 30% of their office space. And the amount, and the amount it's going to save them is stunning. You know, one of the questions I'll often ask is, hey, can you give me an idea, like roughly, what does it cost for you to have an office, a dedicated office for a person? And kind of a number I hear a lot is about $30,000 a year, fully burdened. You know, if you're a 10,000 person organization, you can save 3,000 spots. You're saving $90 million a year that you can now choose to invest in other places. That's huge. You know, so that's going to have a change on how things work. And then finally, you know, if you think about what work is now, my experience, like the experience that you and I are having right now, this is the company to me. The experience. 100%. Yeah. And so this is now the proxy for the company. And organizations that are not putting a world-class experience into the hands of their people are going to have a hard time attracting and retaining. In fact, you know, some research points out that of all the people under the age 35, 45% of them now, a core criteria in their decision-making is how good is the tech that the company is going to enable me with.
Of course, I mean, I think that number, I mean, basically the thing I most hear anecdotally from people under 30 is making fun of the software that their company uses.
That's
it's
right.
like a huge common theme. Like there, you know, as you know, and you're in this space, a lot of the tech, you know, is built and it's world renowned. And then just like anything in life, 7, 12, 13 years later, it's a Frankenstein of what it was. It's slower than the alternatives. And it's because, you know, I mean, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, every company that's ever won started by disrupting in its lack of friction. And then the real challenge is disrupting yourself before somebody else disrupts you.
That's right. You know, and in the case of Microsoft, you know, if you go back a decade, you know, we had built world-class capabilities about delivering on-premise products, but that's all moved to the cloud now. And, you know, we're one of the companies that has figured out how to make that transition, but it's not, you know, a business model change is a very hard transition to make it through. But here's some stunning data just to give you an idea of the research that we're now doing on this employee experience piece. And just to build on your point a little bit, you know, what we hear is these individuals come back and when we interview employees and they go like, the technology that I have in my personal life is so much better than the technology that I have in my business life. And that's just unacceptable. You need to have.
It's not even close, by the way. I mean, I'm having.
That's right. And so
it's happening with live stream software, right? It's, you know, we're having meetings where I'm literally having meetings with individuals in Fortune 500 companies where they're using their personal emails because they want to use a different software because the one that their organization is stuck in, because it's more secure, it doesn't have a feature or isn't innovating as quickly. It makes sense. It's David and Goliath. It's a very real thing.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. There's been kind of this tyranny of or that you can give a great user experience or it can be secure. And for the last couple of decades, it kind of feels like we've been caught in that. That's not the case any longer as we bring all these cloud services together. And so it's interesting as we worked with some of these organizations that have transformed and they're putting this amazing experience in the hands of their users, where users look at it and go like, this is every bit as good as what I have in my personal life. Here's just 3 data points that I think are fascinating. And this is for every leader in a company to ask themselves, would you want these 3 data points? First of all, when you put world-class technology to work that your employees can use, your employees are 121% more likely to feel valued by your company. That's loyalty, that's longevity. They're going to work harder. They're 59% more likely to say that that technology enables them to better serve their customers. Customer NPS and satisfaction is going to go up. And finally, this is an amazing number. These organizations are seeing a full 75-point increase in the internal net promoter score, NPS, from their employees as they give them a wonderful experience. You know, Gary, if as a product owner, if I see a way to get a 5 or 10-point increase in NPS, boy, you go all in because that's a big move. These organizations are literally seeing a 75-point, which I think is 2 things. 1, they're coming from a really poor experience. And then 2, they're landing on a great experience. But those, I think, are the trends. You have to deliver this world-class experience to your users because they're going to be working from everywhere. And as people work from everywhere, it's going to change how orgs work and it's going to change how all the organizations that support them serve their customers.
Thinking about all the efficiency talk, well, I got 1 more minute. Something spurred as I was listening to you. Just curious from your perspective, Brad, where common sense sits in the current equation of business and marketing? You just one man's point of view, just kind of listening to you hack here a little bit. I like it. Just very intuitively curious where you think the responsibility for more common sense, less common sense, like where's common sense in today's business environment from your perspective?
Yeah, when you say common sense, one of the words that comes to my mind is simplicity. So much of, as you talk about, your question, things get very complicated very quick, and people glaze over. And so I think about simplicity as an engineering leader, as an architectural principle, but I also think about that as an architectural principle and how we communicate. I think we just have to be really clear and really simple in all the communications and not try to hide behind a bunch of acronyms and technology talk. People want to have a clear and an honest view of what they can do with your technology.
Brad, I really appreciate your time. Happy holidays.
Hey, same to you. Thank you.
Next, we welcome Heather Malencheck, SVP and CMO of Land O'Lakes.
All right. I like where Andrea's frozen there, Heather. Why don't you give everybody a little sense of, give to us 20 seconds of what you do now in your career?
Yeah, so I'm the newly appointed CMO for the wonderful Land O'Lakes company based in Minnesota. And super excited to be here. I've been at the company about 3 months now, so really excited to talk.
Great.
Sorry?
Just getting into it.
Yeah.
And your prior gig, because I think a lot of people will know that brand as well.
Yeah, so Chief Marketing Officer of a little known brand, Harley Davidson. So yeah, had the real fortune in my career of working with some amazing brands.
Heather, you continue this incredible lineup of really, incredible marketers. So I'm really excited to ask you this. From your perspective, which consumer behavior shifts will be key for brands to figure out and take advantage of to drive business growth?
Yeah, so, really interesting listening to folks talking earlier today. I think that, the big one I would say is there's so many social norms shifting, and I think it was, might have been Essie that was saying earlier, we don't really know what's going to be happening in 6 months' time. We can all, there's a lot of conjecture. What we've seen and what I think is going to be one of the permanent changes is the way people shop. So that's certainly, our shift to digital was fast and furious. I think the other one is sort of the view of home. So as maybe less of a social place, more of a private place. So the way that people think about their homes is a little different. We've actually benefited from some of that. People are at home cooking, baking, and so that's part of what our efforts are. Have been really good. We've sold more butter this year, I think, than we've ever sold. The other piece that's really interesting, and it kind of connects back to what you were talking about previously with Brad, is this idea of digital and the shift to digital. So, we are a farmer-owned co-op. So some of us, most people would know us as a butter company, but we're actually a farmer-owned co-op. So we're owned by farmers across America, and a big part of our role is supporting those farmers. So as you think about, we really have this farmer to fork structure. So all the way from rural community and the farmer and the seeds and the soil health, all the way through to, butter and the products on your table. And what's been really interesting about this digital piece is, and it relates back to some of the work that we're doing at Land O'Lakes, is there's a huge digital divide in this country that we sometimes forget about. So we can sit here today and we take somewhat for granted the fact that we have high-speed internet. So we're able to work from home, or we're having this great conversation, or we're on Zoom all the time, when in fact there are about 18 million Americans who don't have access to high-speed internet. So just think about that for a second. You've got kids who are in rural communities who are not able to do distance learning. People can't get access to medical help, or farmers who don't have the data that they need to be able to run profitably. So we're actually part of we're leading a coalition of companies, actually Microsoft included, around this thing called American Connection Project, which is really trying to bridge that digital divide and push for funding and policy around getting broadband into some of these communities, rural and underserved. So it's one of those things, I think, as we think about what's happening this year and what's going to be really important going into next year, that I want to bring to the table.
Heather, you're only 100 days in, it sounds like. You know, actually, I'm going to go in a different angle because I'm trying to bring as much value in this program as possible. What should individuals here that are taking leadership roles in new organizations think about in their first 100 days, right? You've ascended in your career, so I'm sure this has happened more than once. You're in the prime of your career, from my opinion, at this point. So what have you learned? Do you have any tried and true principles of things that people should consider when they first enter a new leadership role in an organization that they haven't been in before, no matter how much homework they did or prep to be part of that company, excuse me?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a challenging time to come in and be a new leader in a company. But I would say, I mean, my first and foremost is always connecting with the team. And so that's been no different in how I've come into Land O'Lakes. So really spending time with the team, figuring out the talent on your team. And I don't mean direct reports, I mean all levels of the organization. So I've spent my first 100 days really getting to know the team, how we work, and my peers in the organization, and spending time with them as well. So I think connecting on a human level, I think with everybody has been really important. And this, you know, the Zoom environment has been great. And I've been the benefactor, I think, of the team has been working really well virtually. So I've waltzed in September and they're so good at it that that's helped me get ahead of the game. But it's really about connecting on that human level. And I think particularly now, everybody is feeling this pandemic in lots of different ways. You've got, you know, we talk a lot about parents who have distance learning and have to be teachers. So you got to take that into account. But you've also got people on your team who are single and living alone and feeling levels of incredible isolation. So I think it's just really important to connect on a human level and really understand the dynamic there.
Themes of this talk: speed, contextual creative, cost of creative, your overall kind of state of the union of 2020, things that around those themes that stood out, or anticipations or affirmations or considerations for 2021?
Yeah, I mean, you know, agile is such an overused term, and I know you talk about this a lot, right? It drives me a little crazy. We need to be more agile, and I think we do. But I look at our operating model, and I'm looking at that with the team now, and I think we really, some cases you have to slow down to speed up. So really, we're really looking at our processes and driving out some of the inefficiencies. It's kind of what Deborah was talking about earlier too, to enable us to be to accelerate our progress, I would say, and be in that space. So I think that's a big part of it. Cost to creative, you know, I am blessed with a company that has so many stories to talk about that, you know, the storytelling is a big part of it. And I think the authenticity comes through when you don't have these big cinematic productions, but actually in just telling those human stories. So we are probably more down that path, and I see us, you know, continuing to do that as well. I think the other piece, Gary, is just, you know, we talk a lot about brand relevance, and I think cultural relevance today is critical. So, you know, cultural competency of an organization, and that goes way beyond marketing, but really staying to, and I loved what Essie was talking about in terms of human centricity, because it is about that. It's about really understanding what else is going on in people's lives and how you fit in there. But it relates to how we hire people and how HR think about it, your brand, supply chain, you know, everything. Everybody in the company really needs to be culturally competent these days, and that's a full-time ongoing effort. That's not something you do a study for once a year. That's something that you really need to be. It's more of a breaking news capability than making a documentary, right? Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a big place. And I think about, you know, sometimes we miss the cultural insights. You know, market research companies, traditional market research companies, I think, miss the boat on that. Oftentimes they'll be doing studies in a more traditional way. They'll completely miss the social impact that the work might have. You know, so I think we need to really think differently about how we develop those insights as well. I think sometimes the best way to think about what's going to happen over the next 5 years is by understanding missteps or things that really worked well in the last 5 years. When you think back of the real revolution of this device and marketing as you know it, you've probably evolved a lot as a marketer. Yeah. What stands out as the thing that you really feel like, oh, you know, 6 years ago, I had this point of view, and wow, has the last 5 years really taught me that I wasn't on the right side of history there, you know, whether, you know, because it's empowering. You know, I love when I'm wrong.
I love having conviction. I'm passionate, but I mean it. I love it because it's like the game is humbling you and you're like, okay, you know, no matter how much, you know, and so anything stand out when I say that maybe the last 2, 3, 4 years, maybe something that happened in a Harley or you as a consumer, anything stand out? Because I think sometimes that pattern recognition helps for the future.
Yeah, I think I think the shift to mobile, because I think in some ways digital always made total sense to me. What I always worry about, to be honest, Gary, is I worry that we overcorrect and swing the pendulum.
You go too far, like we start doing AR executions before the consumer's there.
Yeah, before they're ready for it, right?
It's the biggest reason, Heather, that I get upset when people are like, oh, you're a disruptor, you're I'm like, no, I am practical. Right. What you believe in is yesterday. I have no interest in tomorrow other than keeping an eye about it. But what I'm thinking and passionate about is storytelling, building brand, creating results today.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I really worry about this overcorrection. So even though, and you know, as we talk about the digital shift that's happened, the significant shift that's happened this year, there will be a point where I don't think that means that we never, ever again go down some of the more traditional routes, because that'll happen too. So I'm always wary about overcorrecting and swinging the pendulum way too far. So
I think that's right. I think that's a huge mistake by some people that are super progressive, and then you've got the middle is a beautiful place. Heather, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Next, we welcome John Levy. He's a behavioral scientist and founder of The Influencers, a secret dining experience and private community, which we hope he'll share more about. John is launching his second book in May called You're Invited, The Art and Science of Cultivating Influence. Thank you. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me. This is so fun.
Hey, John.
So what shall we talk about today? Shall we dive into some neuroscience or some fun marketing stuff?
You know, I think that's one and the same sometimes if you decide to frame it up. I think it'd be great from a behavioral scientist kind of point of view. What is your biggest prediction of things we should be thinking about or looking out for in 2021 and how they may impact the opportunities for the individuals that want to storytell?
So I think one of the most interesting things is that there's a complete lack of novelty, right? So most people are just reproducing other people's content slightly differently. But there's a section of the brain called the SNVTA. What it stands for doesn't really matter, but it's the major novelty center of the brain. And it responds relative to how new or different something is. And when it responds, it actually causes you to want to explore and understand it. It makes you want to go out there and see it or experience the brand or participate. Right now, I'm seeing a lot of brands that are really playing it safe. A lot of that probably has to do with cancel culture. People are scared of saying the wrong thing and then being completely canceled out. But the fact is that we won't stand out and we won't be remarkable in any meaningful way if we're not willing to do something novel. And the interesting thing is that when we do something novel, the brain responds with neuroplasticity. We're literally creating new memories, and not just the experience or that idea that's novel is more memorable, but everything, the brand, the smells, the tastes. And so I think one of the things that we're really going to need to look at is how do we create novelty within the limitations and how we're confined by being in our homes? And so how will brands actually accomplish that? The second thing that I'm really seeing is that in 1984, the average American had 3 close friends besides family. By 2004, that was 2. Nowadays, it's probably even less. And we're dealing with a loneliness epidemic, which means that if we don't do something about it, it'll actually impact people's health. Being lonely is on par with smoking a pack a day of cigarettes in terms of impact. But this also means—
John, what's your perspective? 2 things on that. A, how do those reports get created? You know, I'm always curious by that. Okay, cool. Which report in 84? How many people? So A, those reports in 84 and 2004, how are they created just to educate the audience? And then B, what's your hypothesis on that momentum?
So those reports, if memory serves, come from a really large study of thousands of people across America that's done every year by University of Chicago. Okay. And so they ask questions that are supposed to be relevant, and every so often they just add that question. And And then why do I think that trend is? I think it's a few things. The first is as it got less expensive to travel and people moved more, then we would be more distant from our friends and more isolated as a byproduct. And then my hunch is that trend increased even more because when you look at loneliness statistics, Gen Zers are the most lonely. And they feel like they're understood the least and least connected, which I think brings me to this incredible opportunity for brands, which is that I think the brands that are really going to succeed are the ones that can provide a sense of belonging. Ultimately, we want to feel like we're part of something. And we're not getting that from our social communities because we're so isolated. And so if you can do that, like Heather just came on, she was talking about Harley Davidson, where she used to work. That organization has an incredible level of belonging for its members and customers. And so there's sorry.
No, please go ahead.
There's a bunch of really interesting ways that companies can do that, and they're completely non-intuitive. The first is most brands think that if I'm really, or most people think, if I'm really nice to you, Gary, you're going to like me more. And that's probably true to some degree. But human beings have this thing called the IKEA effect. And it says that we disproportionately care about our IKEA furniture because we had to assemble it. And so what we actually want to do is find ways to get our customers to invest effort into us as brands.
John, quick, because I always think a lot about parenting, nature, nurture.
Mm-hmm.
On the lonely aspect, any thoughts on modern parenting? Like, I think a lot about entitlement.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I think there's a macro trend that people continue to not talk about, which is every empire creates incredible vulnerability just around the place where America is in its dominance. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fruitfulness and the wealth and the power. And, you know, obviously there's incredible pockets of poverty and other issues in this country, but in the macro, America's standing in the world for 100 years. Thoughts about loneliness from a parenting dynamic? Anything from your observations, studies, science, behavior, life?
So I absolutely love that you brought this up. There's a great book called Coddling of the American Mind by John Haidt, NYU professor, brilliant. And one of his biggest arguments is that human beings are anti-fragile, which means that there are things that are fragile. You drop a glass, it'll break. There are things that are robust. You hit a building, nothing will happen to it. But then human beings are anti-fragile, which means it's like lifting weights. You tear muscle and it grows back stronger. And when we get too comfortable, we atrophy. We become weaker. And this generation and generation after generation, we've actually coddled them to the point that they're in college and now they don't need to speak to their own teachers to say, I need an extension. Mom or dad will email the professor saying, my child is special and needs more time for a test. But as a byproduct, if we don't learn those social skills and how to navigate them, then we're going to end up weaker as a byproduct. And we're seeing it as Gen Z is entering the workforce, this issue that HR doesn't really know how to connect with them in the same way. So to speak to your point about loneliness, when you have a generation that has been generally coddled, that told that, you know, their opinion matters more than other people's, and that if they don't like something, they don't have to hear it, then they never had to build any strength in order to deal with other people's opinions or corporate issues or any of these other things. And so they're probably less prepared to deal with isolation.
Then you also then have, when that becomes the realization that the individuals that parented in that ecosystem have less interest in being accountable for that creation, so it's easier to blame. So
I first of all, I have a ton of respect for the difficulty of parenting.
It's the hardest.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, everything's hard. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't have more thoughtful conversations, because I think we've gone very pointing instead of thumbing.
So I think that there's a ton that needs to be explored here, right? And when you speak to parents, you often hear things like, well, all the other parents let their kids have cell phones, so what do you want me to do? And I respect that that's an issue. I think the question is what do we want to prepare people for? And what is it that you actually have bandwidth? Because if you have 2 jobs and you're barely making ends meet, then there's only so much bandwidth for other things. And I think that there's just a ton of complexity there.
I love it. John, thank you so much for being on the show, brother. We appreciate this angle, which I think brings a lot of value to the combo.
Last but not least, we welcome Darrell M. Blocker, retired CIA operative and COO of MOSAIC. Darrell has had a 32-year career in the U.S. intelligence community and was the most senior Black CIA officer in the Directorate of Operations, with a rank equivalent to a 3-star general before joining the corporate world. Darrell is an ABC News contributor and serves 2 great nonprofits. Darrell now lives in LA after a lifetime residing and working in foreign countries in Africa, Asia, and Europe. Welcome, Darrell.
I really appreciate being here, and nice to meet you and see you as well, Gary.
It's a real pleasure, Darrell. So, you know, obviously you have an incredibly, I like how it has retired on the CIA operative part.
You actually do retire. It's not the mafia.
From your perspective and coming from your angle, which is why we wanted to have really a bunch of different angles here, what do you see from consumer behavior that is an enabler to growth in 2021, or observations or opportunities?
Well, the guest that you had on about 2 iterations ago talked about how corporate America 10 months ago would never have considered the fact that they could run a business with most of their personnel not physically in a brick and mortar location. And at this point, it's not going to go back to what it was. All these businesses are going to have to recognize that that the paradigm has shifted. And so from someone who's looking at it from the perspective of someone involved in a intelligence and security firm, 2 things jump out at me. The global Internet of Things, which includes, pandemic fatigue, which could include insider threat or insider risk or insider trust, however your company defines it. And it is going to change when you go from being on a system at work to using your own private, your private devices, your laptop, your iPad, and your phone, which of course are all connected. And if the bad guy, so to speak, someone trying to steal your IP has access to one, then essentially they have access to all. So looking at the Internet of Things, looking at the vulnerability of people's home systems, and not being as diligent as if they would in the office space is a vulnerability that I think everyone should be concerned with. And as an ancillary to that, the mental health of your workers. Most people enjoyed getting up and leaving the home. There were stresses at home that you could kind of get away from in the workplace. And now that they're both combined, that stress is there. The stress, of course, causes people to do things that they might not otherwise do, including opening up an email, a phishing email that allows somebody to have system access that you would otherwise not want them to do. So just the fatigue of dealing with the pandemic and the stress of maybe not being able to meet your mortgage might make you more liable to fall for the outreach from a firm that's really the Chinese government or the Russian government or whoever it is that's targeting you.
What do you think is most fascinating about the marketing that you consume? Have you gotten a sense of your own self at this point in your life, of the things that capture your attention and you get excited about?
I do. And so essentially I have 3 kind of bailiwicks that I'm involved in now. So I'm doing my creative side. I'm working with entertainment media ventures, and we're creating human interest stories with a twist of espionage. So I'm able to kind of pull in some of my past lives into my creative world. And there is an art to an intelligence, and there's some science to it as well. But I'm tapping into the creative side. I'm working with foster youth and kind of tying in some of those stories into my creative side. And for MOSAIC, of which I'm still kind of involved in the intel security work, I'm doing some of the things like tracking down defrauders. And so all my worlds, all the things that I truly enjoy doing, reading, studying, figuring out puzzles, I'm able to kind of do with foster youth and youth that have a foster care experience for Peace for Kids. I'm able to tie that into a storyline for a pitch that might be coming up on the Hollywood side of what I'm doing. And I'm also pursuing that through MOSAIC and chasing bad guys. I'm not chasing Al Qaeda or ISIS anymore, but there are a lot of bad people out there doing a lot of bad things to people that love them, people that were partnered with them, some people that were even, related to them. So I have 3 passions and I get to use them all kind of simultaneously.
How just to take a left field turn for some of the entrepreneurs that are listening, what are your recommendations around self-awareness and patience and, context and pattern recognition? Some of the things that I'm sure inevitably led to you being in a place where you're still a young man and able to do all your passions. Any thoughts on like tried and true principles that give you the leverage to be in a happy state in what you do?
Trust. It really boils down to trust. Trust is the currency of an intelligence operative. Trust is the currency of every marketing strategy that's ever been developed. And so I work a lot on building trust, and you build trust slowly. You build trust by making sure that person that you're dealing with, the person that you're talking with, feels valued, that they feel that they actually have a role in whatever mission you have laid out, the new campaign for Land O'Lakes or for Harley or for the CIA. They're really not that different. And it boils down to the personal connections that you should have with your employees. If you only know them as, whatever their employee number is or the job that they do, then you're not doing enough, because their cubby will probably give you a little about who they are, whether they're a sports fan or whether, they prefer animals or they got pictures of their grandchildren or whatever it is. People decorate themselves in a way that allows you to engage them on a personal level without making it kind of creepy. But once people feel like you actually see them, that you actually care about how they spent their weekend, or not just the latest numbers that need to be provided. So building trust, and it's a daily thing. It's a daily outreach, and it should never be a drain. It should just be as easy as breathing, as easy as walking into the office and acknowledging that person. When someone walks into your office, Control-Alt-Delete. That person could have gone anywhere in the world, but they came to you. That level of intimacy when it comes to connecting with your people.
Build on that. Talk to me about the role from your perspective, given your career and your angles and your observations around intuition.
Intuition is ingrained into our DNA. We are the only species on the planet that talks ourselves out of something that we know could be dangerous. And that, whether the hair is falling up on the back of your neck, intuition is huge. The CIA, when they're looking for someone like myself, someone who is an operations officer and not a spy, I'm a spy handler, recruited and handled spies, and there's semantics, but there is a huge difference. And what they're looking for is a collection of intellectual, social, and personality traits that allow you to be affable, that allow you to be resilient, that allow you to engage in other cultures and learn more about the person that you're talking to than yourself, and wanting them to listen. So listening is huge. And one of the wisest people I ever knew, who just happens to be my ex-wife, says that listening is not waiting for your turn to speak. So if you think you're a good listener, I would surmise that you should ask your partner and then work on it from there, because I can pretty much guarantee you that you're not the listener that you think you are.
Do you think that people have different listening styles? Because this is a category that I spend a lot of time on. I'm surprised by how or I actually use talking to listen. I haven't gone deep in this to educate myself on what they are, but I'm extremely aware of its truth, and I see it in others as a listening mechanism. Have you explored listening enough to add to this conversation and context? Because I think silence is not listening. I see it every day.
Right. Yes, I agree. Because listening is more than just with your ears. You're listening with, with your with your being, literally. And people, every one of us has been in a conversation where the person you're talking to is doing this motion, and you know they're just waiting for their turn to speak. So they're not really engaged. They're not really listening to you. When you're not being listened to, look for the body signs. You'll know if you're not getting through. The person's starting to fidget. You're looking for anything that suggests that their brain is, or their thoughts are elsewhere. So you learn how to listen to the agent who's telling you these secrets, who's telling you things about them that they've never shared with anyone else. You're listening when the ambassador calls you in and talks about how something you're doing might impact American policy. You learn how to listen a lot more, or you end up on the wrong side of history in our organization, getting on the being in front of however many people we're in front of right now is just not a place most people at CIA want to be. So listening keeps you out of trouble as well.
I really appreciate your insights, my friend. I wish you a tremendous holiday, and I think you brought a lot of more context to this incredible event. Thank you.
I really appreciate the time. Thank you. Cheers.
Andrea, last one of the season. I thought it was an unbelievable one. Thoughts from your perspective, if you can even talk, because your Wi-Fi has been very, very janky.
Right. No, I love that we ended on listening, because we can't thank all those that have been here with us on this journey. And we'd love to listen and hear more about what you like in 2021, what you liked about 2020. So hit us up on marketingforthenow@gmail.com. But yeah, just if this journey has been a tremendous one. And Gary, love you. Great way of pushing us in different directions and allowing people to contribute with all their comments along the way.
Thank you for that. Thank you for you, the team. Maybe Georgie and Summer want to come on screen so we can give them a little love. They've been incredibly instrumental in the production and organization of this. So I don't know if they're going to go humble and not show up on the screen, but I'd love for them to come and just wave real quick. But other than that, I just want to thank everybody who's been watching this year. Obviously, it's something we are looking to continue next year. We were, obviously, I'm reading a lot of the comments from the live streams in real time. Big shout out to StreamYard for the infrastructure that allows me to do that, which has enabled us to really create some high level events. And we, Andrea will tell you, if I wasn't on the screen right now, I'm pushing her to continue to elevate the people that we put on the screen and mix up the perspectives and bring different values. And I hope everybody got a ton of value. I hope everybody has a tremendous 2021 and a holiday and New Year's and all that. And thank you for your time.
We've got an episode coming up in January, on January 21st. So we'll see you hopefully at noon on Thursday, January 21st. Happy holidays.